Books now.
The radical fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, July 14th. I have an exciting interview for you today. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to be talking to Norbert Michel, who is the vice president and director of the Cato Institute's Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives. I think I first met you, I don't know, on a bus at Mont Pelerin. You were at the Cato Institute, and you were at Heritage in those days.
I think it was a plane, but
Could be a plane.
it could have been a bus, but yeah. No.
Something like that. I
Yeah.
think Mont Pelerin was related, something
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
this is great. I've been following your work for years.
Thank you.
I'm interested in finance, and you've written a lot of really important stuff on financial regulations over the last long time.
Bunch
10,
of years.
15
Yeah, no. I don't know about how important it's been, but it's been a lot of years. I know
No,
that.
it's important. I don't know how, let's put it this way, how much impact it's had,
Yeah.
sadly, but yes, it's important, and it should have a lot more impact. So you've got a new book out,
Yes.
and uh, it's
Crushing Capitalism.
yeah.
Yeah.
Why do I have the wrong book up?
Well, I've got
The bio,
two.
it's got financing opportunity.
That's the other one. So
Okay, I
yeah.
didn't realize you had that one as well. All right.
Yeah.
So
They're
two
both
books, Financing Opportunities, the Financial Markets Have Fueled American Prosperity for More Than 2 Centuries. Okay, that one I have to get. I've got the other one already. I
okay.
need to get this because I love this topic.
I'll send it to you.
That'd be great. I'll just download it on Kindle because
Okay. All right.
the fewer books I have, the better in terms of bookshelf space.
Yeah.
But the other one is Crushing Capitalism, How Populist Policies Are Threatening the American Dream, which is very relevant right now. And we're constantly discussing it on our show. I had Scott Lincecum on the show last week. So this is the whole Trump administration, MAGA, populism, left and right, really,
Yeah.
is a big issue. So tell us what motivated you to write this book, because you have been doing mostly finance stuff. So
Yeah.
so why this?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a change for me. Yeah. I actually, the motivation for this actually started when I was still at Heritage. At some point I went from being just research fellow to being put in charge of our Center for Data Analysis over there, or the
Okay.
Data Center for
Yeah.
Data Analysis.
Yeah.
So I was sort of in charge of the empirical economics piece. And we started getting asked to defend or to discuss this idea about income stagnation. And that was the first time, this is way before Trump.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, well, what stagnation? What?
Well, this was a story that came out of the left, because I remember debating
That's
this
right. That's right.
during the financial crisis. People would say the economy, people are stagnant since the 70s, and it was all leftist
That's right.
economists. We'll talk about that.
That's right. That's right. And then the right started picking it up as the sort of premise for, yeah, we need to do more to combat free trade and whatever, China and all these things. So it was sort of in the background though, and then as Trump won, really after Trump won, it became much more prominent. And I sort of started putting all this stuff together, and I really didn't have a book. I had just this giant pile of stuff. And then long story short, that just kept going in terms of that theme on the left. You started seeing it more and more and more and more. And, I got really tired of it. And the motivation for me was that's not true.
Yeah.
That stagnation story is just wrong. And that free market paradise story is also wrong. And I don't really like people using data to lie about things.
Hmm.
So, that was kind of that was my motivation for it. And I was lucky enough that at Cato, it was sort of like, yeah, okay, we could do it. And so I was able to do it along with my other stuff, but still got that one out, get this one out. So
It was part of the motivation for leaving Heritage, the fact that they went the populist route and away from kind of a defensive markets.
I mean, I had a great opportunity to come to Cato,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't change my decision for a million years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that certainly was on my mind. I'm glad that I'm here now, because I really that would have just clashed. That whole thing clashes with my worldview, my
Hmm.
philosophy, what I like to think of as what I've studied for a very long time. And it gets to the core of, well, what is capitalism? What is free enterprise? What is socialism? How much government involvement should we have?
Yeah.
And that whole thing is just not lined up with my way of thinking at all. Um, so I'm very lucky to be here, and
Yeah.
stick to my principles.
Yeah. So, maybe talk a little bit about this mythology and what the truth is. How do they come up with it? And
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
how do they make such a big mistake, if you will?
Sure. Well, it's sort of dependent on who's saying it and when. So Orrin Cass is a great example.
Hmm.
He came out with that book, The Once and Future Worker, and that's when it really picked up at Heritage. And if you go in there, you'll find a very specific claim of income stagnation, and it's from 1975 to 2015, and it's the wages of non-supervisory workers, and it's adjusted with the consumer price index. And basically, if you take that exact same data series, and even if you just adjust it the way he adjusted for inflation, it turns out that 1975 is the problem. In other words, if you pick 1975, that gives you the lowest possible growth rate that you could have picked
Hmm.
between 1964 and I think the year 2000. So it whether they did it on purpose or whether it's a coincidence, let people decide. But that is my definition of some sort of cherry picking, even if it's by accident.
Hmm.
In other words, what you have to do to get a stagnant line is you have to either have biased the dates, the inflation adjustment, or the income measure itself in some way. Because if you don't do that, if you just pick, basically 99 out of 100 ways show a lot of income growth between 1970 and now, and even
Yep.
before COVID, just if you want to cut it off before COVID.
Yeah.
And there's like one way that you can find, that shows stagnant income, and that's the one that they picked, you know. But I mean, you can look at household income, you can look at median personal income, you can look at total compensation indexes, you can look at consumption measures. You can do this 20 different ways to Sunday, and you're only going to find one way that shows that it's stagnant. And what that means is that the bulk of the evidence does support an enormous amount of growth. Not just a little, a lot. I
So we're a
mean,
lot richer than we used to be.
incredibly so. If you look at households and say like households that earn more than $100,000, that number more than tripled
Hmm.
from 1970 on up to 2019. And if you look at the share of households earning less than $35,000, that share went down. So it's not that people dropped down, it's that a lot of people dropped up. And that
So the
like
middle
that
class is shrinking, but they're shrinking because they're getting rich.
rich. That's right. We're going to have to readjust the definition of middle class if we're not
Mhm.
careful,
Yeah.
because so many people have done so much better.
Now,
Um,
now, of course, a lot of the story, particularly coming out of Piketty and the whole inequality literature, is that yeah, the top of the distribution has done phenomenally well,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
but poor people, poor people, they're the ones who have really taken a hit since the 1970s.
Right. And that's not true either. We do see a lot of that with the Piketty stuff, and then you would see that coming out of the left for a while there, and
Mhm.
then the right started picking that up as well. But if you look at the data sets that follow the same individuals over time, again, you see a lot of growth. You see a lot of phenomenal things. For example, about three-fourths, a little more than three-fourths over the last 5 decades, a little more than three-fourths of all the households uh, spent at least 1 year in the top 20%,
Mm.
at least one. And less than 10% spent more than 1 year in the bottom 10%. This is a really small share. So it's just not true that we have these polar classes. There's an enormous amount of income ability across those groups. A lot of people moving up.
Yeah.
And if you stay away from that and you just look at the census data, so you're not following the same people, again, outside of the 2008 recession, you see most of the income growth for the groups that were in the lower end of the income distribution.
Hmm.
So a lot of growth in the bottom 10, 20, and 30 and 40%. In many cases, more than you saw at the top end.
So what do you think motivates? Because the data, I mean, I agree with you. The data is pretty clear, and
Yeah.
you can splice it and dice it in lots of different ways. And the left had a particular agenda that they were pushing, and this was consistent with that agenda. So I get it. They
Hmm.
biased everything towards that agenda. But what
Hmm.
happened on the right that made this? It made them kind of switch. They used to defend
Hmm.
things are going pretty well.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. So there's a wide swath of people on the right, right?
Yeah.
In my experience, especially at Heritage, Orrin Cass was somebody that nobody ever talked about, and then he was there.
Yeah.
So I don't know what motivates him. There were certain people, and I won't name names, but there were certain people who liked that story because they were able to say, well, the problem is immigration. We've let in so many immigrants, and we
Yeah.
have to clamp down on immigration.
Yeah.
There were other people who, saw it as an opportunity to win in the sense of we, who I never thought I was part of, we need to win. And Trump is anti-trade. And look what free trade did to the Rust Belt. So we need to pound that and talk about how, yeah, maybe free trade's not so great anymore. Maybe we need to be careful. Maybe it's needs to be sensible. And there were a lot of people who I think were anti-China.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just broadly speaking, they're this geopolitical foe, and they're doing industrial policy. And if we don't do industrial policy, we're not going to be able to keep up, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah. Let's mimic them. We don't like them, so let's
Right,
mimic them.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. But they would use the stagnation stuff,
Yeah.
as a way of justifying that.
So,
So it's different groups, though. I
yeah.
think there's a lot of different things going on there, I think.
I mean, they all seem to share a common feature of they somehow want to increase the power of our central government,
Yes.
and this
Or
is
their own, or their
used to do
own.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure some of it is the sort of just, basic power, DC power hungry sort of mindset.
So one of the arguments they make, of course, is and Trump makes and I think has resonated is about industrial jobs and we've lost and you talk about this in the book. We've lost industrial jobs. We're deindustrializing. We need to reindustrialize. And again, this is for years a talking point from the left.
Hmm.
And they kept talking about this and promising one day the jobs will come back.
Hmm.
And I think the political gimmick is that Trump figured out that he could get votes by stealing that and claiming to be more serious about it. So
Well,
what is the truth about deindustrialization?
and I think I mean, you're right. The left did do that for a very long
Yeah.
time. I think it's also uh, important for people to remember that there was a faction. There has always been a faction on the right who was sort of doing the same thing,
Yeah.
like the Pat Buchanans of the world,
Buchanan. Yeah.
Ross Perot.
Yep.
So that was certainly always kind of there. And but the truth then and the truth now, is that it wasn't because of free trade or globalization necessarily, right? It was really a productivity story.
Hmm.
You can see it, basically, um, depending on exactly which data set you want to use. You can go back to like pre-1900s, you can go back to 1920. You can basically look at the most consistent data set you can get at 1943. Um, and and you can see service sector jobs becoming a bigger share of employment while manufacturing is dropping. And it was even steeper with agriculture, you know, and that going on for even longer.
Yeah.
And then so that again in the 40s, that has absolutely nothing to do with China or NAFTA or anything like that. And you could even take the data, the say like the employment data, and cut it off at 1980. So all those trends that took place between 1940 and 1980, and you can just do a simple linear projection and you basically nail manufacturing employment.
Yeah.
So if the China stuff was so important and the NAFTA stuff was so important for jobs, just for jobs, like, you wouldn't be able to do that,
Hmm.
but you can. You can do it for labor force participation as well.
So,
So
concretize, kind of make real what it means, productivity gains. What does that mean?
yes, we can make a lot more stuff with a lot fewer people. I mean, it's
Yep.
really just that simple. If you look at something like steel, basically 1970, one worker would take hours and hours and hours to produce a ton of steel. And now it's close to a half an hour to produce a ton of steel.
Hmm.
If we tried to have as many people working in the steel industry as we did, say like in 1970, we would be producing enough to supply the world with steel, you know, even more or roughly on par with or about the same roughly as what we were doing at the end of World War II when the industrial world had been destroyed.
Hmm.
I mean, so that, just everybody like that wouldn't make sense, right? Like that's not, it's just not where we are anymore. Stanley Tools, you can like there's stories in the Wall Street Journal. They have a new facility in North Carolina. They dropped down from having over 30 to 40 people on an assembly line to maybe like 10. And they're talking about in the next generation, they'll have maybe two.
Yep.
You know, every single thing that we manufacture across the entire world, mind you, not just in the United States, is like that. And that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. That is the definition of becoming richer. But it does mean that you will have fewer jobs to produce certain things. I mean, that is the way that works. And unfortunately, that's like historically, that's always been a thing, right? You think of like Paul Bunyan, the lore of Paul Bunyan, and Patrick Henry in the United
Hmm.
States, with the hammer drill.
Yep. Yep.
I Yeah, you're gonna have fewer people that have to chip rocks. I mean, if you don't want to chip rocks, then that's good.
Yeah. So there's something super attractive about chipping rocks for some reason.
I don't
I
know.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've done it before, even with the machine, and I don't really
yeah,
want to do it that much. So,
not fun at all.
mm-mm.
I mean, there's this nostalgia to a world where we all worked on machines and worked with muscle,
That's right.
whereas progress has basically led us to work more with our minds, which is you would
Yeah.
think is progress.
Yes. It is, that's, I mean, if we wanted to go and say, well, no, 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 the thing that's important is that everybody has jobs. Well, we could do that right away, right? We could outlaw machines,
Hmm.
could outlaw shovels. I think that was a Milton Friedman example.
Yep.
Why are you digging with machines or shovels? You should just dig with spoons. We'll have a lot more jobs.
Yep.
You know, Nobody wants to be in the fields all day. That was backbreaking. That was a very difficult way of life, and we were poor. We were literally impoverished. And the flip side of that is that everybody has to do something to set themselves up to take advantage of the new opportunities. But that's okay because that has been happening. That doesn't mean that everybody is a millionaire,
Yep.
but that's never going to happen that way. The numbers simply bear out that everybody is, on whole, much better off. Our standard of living is so high across the board, even for the people among us who are on the lower sides, lower rung of the income distribution. Have a lot more opportunity, have a lot more amenities, have a much easier life, than we did in, say, like 1900 and 1940, even. So even 1970.
And it's not like we've had these massive unemployment rates. I mean, it's not like
That's
people
right.
lost their jobs and didn't find anything to do.
That's
They
right.
found some stuff to do that pays more.
That's right. The numbers of people who are displaced by a trade shock or some other shock, right, and have to
Yeah.
get a new job, the share that are not able to get a job earning as much as they earned before or more has also been declining steadily.
Yep.
So we've been trading more, and that share has also been declining. So it went from being, I think it was about in the 1970s, only about a third of the people who lost their job could get an equal or higher paying, and
Hmm.
now it's more than half.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
that's while we're trading more,
yeah.
importing more.
Yeah. I mean, because we have the ability to trade because we have the money to trade, and they want the money to invest in the United States.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, people think of trade. People think of service jobs, the service economy, as McDonald's, and McDonald's is fine, but the reality is, like, Apple is service jobs, right? I mean,
Yes, so
Google is
much
service
more.
jobs.
There's so much more. Yeah, no, it's so much more.
Yeah.
And it's service jobs broadly have been an incredibly important part of the US economy really from the beginning. If you go back all the way to just after the Civil War, as we started to industrialize,
Hmm.
uh, service jobs were taking off and were a big share, and they just kept growing, and they've always been growing.
Yeah.
Um, it's definitely not just one type. It's an incredible array of diverse activities that do not require you to stand on an assembly line.
So what happens with all these tariffs? Do you have any sense of
Yeah.
what happens to the U.S. economy? Where do we go from here? Because it
Well,
looks like Trump is not backing down. It looks like
excuse me.
he's
Yeah,
serious
I
about this.
mean, it's been uneven, sort of the application, right?
Yeah.
So some on, some off, and
Yeah.
exemptions, and so I don't, but in general, it doesn't look like he's backing down, and that's incredibly unfortunate because however you want to cut this and sell this. If you're the Trump administration, okay, fine, but the truth is, this is just a tax. And the higher you make it, the more of an impact you're going to have. And it's not just a tax on Americans, it's a tax on everybody. So it's a tax on economic activity. This is designed for people to produce less. And that's what it will do. And the bigger we make the tariffs and the more people retaliate with their own tariffs, the less economic activity we're going to have, the less options we're going to have, the less things we're going to have to buy, and the less income people are going to have, both in the United States and outside of the United States. So they're going to have less income to buy our stuff.
Yeah.
So it's an absolute lose-lose situation. There's no win here. There just isn't. You can tariff the hell out of everything, and you're still not going to bring all those garment factory jobs back and all these
And
these
you
these
want
other
to.
jobs, right? Yeah, who would want to?
Yeah.
But even if you did, that's another thing. If you look, we have had abnormally high, above average tariffs on garment on the garment industry stuff
Yeah.
for decades. It
Huh.
didn't save them.
Yeah.
You're not going to save it now. It doesn't work, and it is going to reduce economic activity and income for people all over the world, and that is not a good thing.
And do you see the same thing happening with immigration?
Yeah, yeah. I That's one of my biggest pet peeves. As an American whose last name is decidedly French,
Yeah.
uh, I recognize that most of our my friends and brethren, and we were not Native Americans. Our ancestors came from somewhere else. This country, uh, you know, right or wrong, is as big as it is because we've allowed people to come here from other places, and it's
Mhm.
not a nationalist thing. It's in the sense that we've literally been built upon the principles of our Constitution, and we let other people come in. And unfortunately, there's always some of that "I was here first" attitude. Um, this is that attitude on crack, apparently. But again, this sort of thing, keeping out people, kicking people out, and keeping people out who are productive members of a society, that's how you shrink it. That's how you isolate it, and that's not how you help people. And you prevent help people from helping themselves. You're impoverishing people. Aside from what you're doing to their individual human rights, you're impoverishing people, both them directly and everyone else indirectly, and it's an incredibly bad idea.
So again, a lose lose.
Yeah, yeah. And look, if we want to talk about securing the border so that we have a better legal immigration system, okay, fine. Yeah, let's do that. That's not what we're doing.
No, it's not what we're doing. Yeah.
The same.
And we know that when the whatever economic crisis follows, it's going to be blamed on whatever freedoms we have. I mean, that's the other
Oh
phenomenon,
yeah.
right? Is that crises always blamed on the
Oh
little bit
yeah.
of freedom that we still have.
That's right. Oh yeah. The 2008 financial crisis was a great example. Somehow that got turned into, well, we had deregulated financial markets. Well, somebody forgot to tell all the people who worked in financial markets that they had been deregulated. But that's what took the brunt of that blame, that idea. And we just expanded regulation and expanded the reach of government. You know, that's that's the way it usually ends up.
So how do we get so rich over the last 50 years, given all that? I mean, that always makes me wonder. Although we did go through a phase of significant deregulation in the 70s,
We
real
did.
deregulation.
And in the 70s, what we did was, the way I look at it is that we went through a change in the type of regulation. So in the 70s, we sort of moved away from rate regulation, and profit regulation, and price controls,
Hmm.
and we did a lot more social regulation, with like EPA
Yep.
and environmental regulation, and just broadly speaking, socioeconomic regulation. And then that started creeping up more slowly over time, and now we're sort of starting to get back to some of that price control stuff,
Hmm.
and a little bit more invasive, which is definitely not good. Um, you know, so we've had a different kind of regulation, but it hasn't really been a shrinking amount of regulation. It's just been a different kind. And I don't know. I don't know. I think in a large part, I think it says, this is my opinion, but
Yep.
I think that it's, in a large part, it talks to um how much better our system, free enterprise included, limited government included, how much better it is in America than in a lot of other places, and how much opportunity we do provide through that kind of system. It's really nothing short of phenomenal, because it could sure as heck be a lot better, and a lot freer, and provide a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, let's talk maybe a little bit about, I saw an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal by the staff of the Wall Street Journal, I guess the editors, on Freddie and Fannie,
Oh yeah.
who you've written a lot about Freddie and Fannie. Walk us through a little bit of the history of Freddie and Fannie and the financial crisis and what's happened to them since.
Sure. Um, you want history like where they started, or just start with the financial crisis?
Give a little indication of where they started, right? I mean, and
Okay.
the purpose, and then we can go to what happened in the early 2000s and go from there.
Okay, sure. So the first thing for everybody to remember on that one, they were never really truly private companies.
Yeah.
In the 1930s, we started Fannie, and that sort of started out as just a government agency. The story's more complicated, but that basically that's what we had. And they were buying government insured mortgages. Eisenhower tried to privatize them, or the Eisenhower administration tried to privatize them, and then it kind of like half-assed it. Um, and we ended up with this government corporation, government sponsorship thing in the 60s, 70s, and then late 60s, we did Freddie Mac. We created that on the government side as well to basically be the same thing as Fannie, but for the Federal Home Loan Bank system, which also was a government sponsored enterprise.
Yep.
Uh, and so then they in the 80s they started to blow up a bit more and grow a bit more, and they always had this mix of public and private, and they always had this quasi-public mission of increasing affordable housing, and that got really kicked into high gear in the 90s under Clinton, and it and without blaming it just on that and
Yeah.
Clinton, eventually it blew up. But it had blown up before. It was just that it was papered over. Like during
Yep.
the S&L crisis,
S&L crisis. Yeah.
yeah, Fannie Mae was also insolvent, but everything else was insolvent, and they didn't want to make it look any worse. So we just kind of like let that one go. So it blew up again in '08, and uh, at that point, they could have been put into receivership where they would have been liquidated and shut down and say, okay, this was a mistake. We shouldn't have gone this route. It keeps blowing up. It keeps costing taxpayers money. But that's, of course, not at all what happened.
There
They
was,
were put into
there was also talk of
conservatorship.
privatizing them and breaking them up into smaller units. I mean, there
There was
was
a lot of talk,
lots of talk.
lots of talk. And nothing short of a miracle that they could lose that much money and bleed that much cash for so long after that, because they did for years,
Yep.
and still come out of it as standing, but they did. So there were multiple, there was one specific set of agreements there that were put in place to put them into conservatorship. And then that agreement was amended over the next several years, I believe 4 times. My count might be off, but roughly 4 times it was
Yeah.
amended. And each time it was amended, the line of credit for the companies was expanded. So by the time it was over, the line of credit was up to over $440 billion combined.
Yeah.
And they just remained in government conservatorship. So they've been in purgatory like that ever since 2008. And it's really questionable, and I don't know where I fall on it, but it's questionable as to whether that debt that they have and the book of business that they have
Hmm.
should be on the federal budget instead of being off the federal budget.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another 7 trillion or so in potential guarantees that probably should be on,
Yeah. At least a portion of it.
at
It's,
least a portion, yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And it's not. So and the agreements as they are written still include something called a liquidation preference, which is sort of like a standard receivership, conservatorship, bankruptcy provision that says, okay, once these companies are back on their feet, if they raise more capital, that's fine. But we, the primary creditor, in this case, the government,
Hmm.
we get a bunch of money first.
Yeah.
So we make the taxpayers whole. We compensate the taxpayers for all the risk that they've taken on.
Yeah.
Well, that number's now really large, like a couple $100 billion, right?
Yeah.
So now to meet capital requirements, they would have to raise a couple $100 billion in the markets and pay off the liquidation preference. So now you're talking about like roughly, $400 billion with a B. That's a tall order for anything, any
Yeah.
company, much less these like sort of like monoline insurance type companies. So, the smart money is what they're going to do is they're going to redo the agreements and they're going to tell the taxpayers, yeah, don't worry about it. We already got paid back.
It's just 200 billion
Yeah,
in a world of trillions. It's not a big deal.
no big deal. And it is true that the companies have paid back a lot of cash. But again, that was the deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like it's a principal interest agreement. And, with your home mortgage, for example, if you just said, well, I mean, no, I didn't pay the principal back, but I paid you a lot of cash. I paid you enough cash
Interest.
to
Yeah.
cover the value of the house. So I'm good, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
bank's going to say, no, you're not good. That wasn't the deal. And it's the same sort of thing here. But the smart money is they're going to do something like that
Yeah.
again.
It's amazing to me. I mean, these companies are so corrupt. I remember that in the early 2000s, for years, you couldn't even get a audited financial statement
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
out of I
Out
think
of
it was Fanny or Freddie. They couldn't even audit
Yeah.
themselves. And
Well, that's another thing, like when they were created with those charters, they were given these federal charters, they were exempt from SEC registration. They didn't have to file those statements
yeah,
at
yeah,
all. I mean, eventually
yeah.
they volunteered what they wanted to, but they didn't have to. They didn't have to pay state and local income taxes.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had a line of credit with the Treasury from the beginning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And Dodd and Frank, I think, did pretty well off of these companies, and
yeah. And
ultimately their bill saved them.
yeah, I mean the whole thing, the HERA Act, everything. I mean they could have liquidated them, but there was no way they were going to do that, and they didn't. Um, and they're now they're more entrenched in the mortgage market, U.S. mortgage market, than they
Yeah.
were before the crisis.
Yeah. So this is Trump, according to the Wall Street Journal, on his, I am working on taking these amazing companies public. I want to be clear, the US government will keep its implicit guarantees, and I will stay strong in my position on overseeing them as president.
Yeah, that's so clear. I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know. If it's an implicit guarantee,
Why are
then
you saying it?
you
Yeah.
don't say you shouldn't be saying it.
Yeah.
And to take them public, well, okay, but that's so are you saying that they're part of the government right now? And if they are, why isn't that on the government balance sheet?
Yeah. Yeah. And if there's an implicit guarantee, why isn't that on the government's balance sheet?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's no end. Yeah, it's one of those that perpetually amazes me. I mean, there's a small interest group out there in Washington D.C. fighting for these guys, and
Hmm.
everybody else, I think, knows that it's completely corrupt and it makes no sense, and yet it
Every
continues.
time I write anything about the GSEs and how they should have been shut down and they should be shut down and that sort of stuff,
Yeah,
I get tons of hate email and hate
interesting.
messages. It's great.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Good, good. So this is lobbyists and employees, I assume, because I don't think there's anybody
I don't know.
does
Yeah.
economics who believes they should still be around.
I don't know if it's bots or I don't know, I don't know what it is, but it
Oh,
but it
okay.
never fails. It never
Getting
fails.
hate mail is a sign you're doing something in the world that's good. I'm a huge supporter of it.
Good.
Talk about another institution that is, and this one might be ending maybe. The CFPB, which is it's a unique animal that was
Mhm.
created also out of the financial crisis. A lot of, financial crisis resulted in a lot of regulations and a lot of in new regulatory agency. This one. So tell us a little bit about its origins, what happened to it, and now what the Trump administration is trying to do with it.
Sure, sure. This is a Dodd-Frank creation,
Yep.
flat out. This was Title 10 of Dodd-Frank, and it was basically the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren and another lawyer. And the idea is that we needed this, or the idea that as they pitched it, is that we needed a consumer protection agency just for the financial markets. And they kind of sort of ended up tying this to the financial crisis story, saying, well, that was the problem. We didn't have a regulator like this, and all those people that bought those mortgages were tricked.
Hmm.
They didn't know what they were buying. They didn't understand what their payments were going to be and all that kind of stuff, which, that's a stretch.
Yeah.
But that aside, that story ignores that we had to create the CFPB. What we had to do was we couldn't ignore federal law because there were 20 something statutes that were absolutely 100% consumer protection for financial market stuff, right?
Yep.
So we moved all of that stuff over to this new agency. And some of that authority came from, and a little bit is still shared with the Federal Trade Commission, whose motto is protecting America's consumers,
Okay.
uh, and the federal banking regulators. So
Yeah.
the Fed, basically what you had before basically was you had the Fed, the comptroller, and the FDIC doing the consumer protection in the banking industry,
Hmm.
and the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice doing it everywhere else. So, maybe you had a case for consolidating it at the FTC or something like that, maybe. But that's not what we did. And we created this new agency, the CFPB. We created it with some interesting structure that we didn't have in the other agencies. At first, you couldn't fire the director. They get their budget from this direct allocation from the Federal Reserve instead of appropriations and some other things. Some of this has changed a little bit, but not all of it. Um, anyway, uh, what's going on now is the Trump administration has decided, yeah, we're just going to send everybody home and kind of ignore that it's there. We're just not going to do anything with it. So it's kind of just sitting there in limbo. And, I don't know what the end game is. I would not be sad to see the CFPB go,
Not at all. Yeah.
because it was not necessary in the first place. So, I mean, I believe that firmly. Um, but you would need an act of Congress to completely get rid of it. Um, so they could, I guess, theoretically, for the remainder of the term, just sit there, and not do very much with it. Just do the bare minimum to comply with the law.
So they basically
Um,
fired everybody who worked there. There were
a
a lot
lot,
of employees, if I remember right.
a lot of people, yes, a lot of people have been furloughed. A lot of people have been told don't come to work. I think some of them are in limbo still.
Mhm.
Um, and they're just really not doing very much. They had
Yep.
nominated a director, and then they pulled that nomination and sent him to Treasury. So it's just kind of hanging out. And Russ Vogt, who is the OMB director,
Yep.
is the acting CFPB director. So, and I'm all for,
Absolutely.
not having it.
Yep. I mean, we have too many financial regulators anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a large financial institution, you're regulated by over a dozen financial regulators,
A
federal
dozen. I never got
regulators.
to a dozen.
Yeah,
Wow.
uh,
Okay.
or potentially anyway. I
Yep.
mean, depending
Yep.
on exactly what you're
Yeah.
doing, you know.
Yeah.
But that's another thing, the CFPB, it really didn't make any sense to give them examination authority. If you're going to have an agency that's doing the consumer protection,
Hmm.
that's protection against fraud and deception. And
Yep.
you don't examine somebody for that
Yeah.
necessarily, right? It's if a case is brought, you deal with
Yep.
it. So they've been a controversial agency from the beginning.
And if they have done real harm since they were established, I mean, is there was there
I
cost?
I'd say so, you
Okay.
know. I mean, it's an enormous regulatory cost. You know, and it becomes hard to do business.
Yeah.
The very first one of the very first things that they did under Richard Cordray, was they changed their interpretation of the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, which sounds benign,
Hmm.
but but they changed the way they interpreted it, had been interpreted at the federal level for decades. And then they went and they said, okay, we're going to apply it retroactively. So they sued this company, PHH, and they fined them $100 million. Now, how can you comply with a law retroactively
Yeah.
based on an interpretation that somebody just made up?
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, that's a real cost, I mean,
So,
and it's more than $100 million. So yeah, it's not been my favorite agency. They basically destroyed the payday lending industry. Um,
hmm.
there is still small dollar lending, but it's not, the industry is not anything like it was. A lot of people dropped out of the consumer small
Yeah.
dollar lending industry because they implemented a rule that was much harsher than it needed to be, that really wasn't based on evidence, really wasn't based on data. Um, a lot of people on the left have been crusading against payday lending and small
Yeah.
dollar lending for a very long time.
Hmm.
They wanted price controls. They couldn't get the price controls. So they did de facto price controls. And that's what happened.
They killed it. Yeah.
Yeah. And now you're hearing a lot of that on the right too, with in terms of price controls.
Yep.
So, but
Yep.
anyway.
So what's your assessment of this new bill, the Genius Act, the Stablecoin Act?
Mhm.
Is this a positive step?
I think so. There's some stuff in there that I think could be better, but there needs to be some clarity. There really does need to be some regulatory clarity, um, in terms of how the SEC is going to regulate these things, how
Hmm.
the banks are going to regulate these things. I mean, you can't move money in an unregulated fashion. Now, I'm not saying that that shouldn't be the case. I'm
Yes.
saying
In the world in which we live. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you're opening yourself up to a lot of liability without that regulatory clarity, and we need something. And there's a lot of good stuff in the bill. Um, I think it should be opened up even more. I think
Hmm.
part of it is anti-competitive in terms of it makes it more difficult um, for non-banks and non-financial companies to issue their own stable coins.
I mean, the
Uh,
obvious people to issue stablecoins, in my view, is like Amazon.
that's right. That's
I
right.
mean, they're the ideal player in the stablecoin market, and
Yep.
yet this bill makes it more difficult for them to do it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's not the way to go. And that's anti-competitive. And, if you are sitting there on the left or right, and you're saying, you don't want concentrated economic power, well, I mean, you would want to open that up,
Yep.
you
Do you,
know.
is there other stuff coming down on crypto that you think is going to be positive?
Um, there's a market structure bill. Oddly enough, Clarity Act is one of the
Okay.
it's one of,
It's the name.
uh, and that one faces a lot of higher hurdles. I don't know. I don't really see the obvious path for that one to get out of the Senate. Um, but there's some stuff in there that's good, and there's some stuff in there that could also be a lot better.
Hmm.
Um, maybe some, I think to really fix all of this stuff, is going to take a much broader view than what we have at the moment. And unfortunately, even though the administration seems to be in many ways like pro crypto, it's not principled
Yeah.
in many unfortunate ways. And to start with the idea that it should be okay for us to exchange money, without getting the government's permission before we do that.
Yep.
That would be a big start, but instead it's not really looked at that way. And that's the genesis of some of these problems.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's an inherent conflict there. On the one hand, they like crypto for some reason. On the other hand, they don't want to give up the control and the
Right.
power
That's
that the
right.
controlling money gives them.
That's right. Yeah. And then, you know, the House version of that and the Senate version of that and how that plays in with the administration is a mess because a lot of people in both chambers see the administration, rightly or wrongly,
Yeah.
as in it for their own profit, and they see it as corrupt. And so it's a mess. Um, in more ways than one, but that's a big problem, to get it across politically, where you really do, again, with just broader crypto, you need some clarity
Hmm.
on what is a token versus what is a security. And without that, you could easily see a replay of what happened under Gary Gensler's SEC
Yep.
if Paul Atkins isn't there or somebody on the other side comes back who's a Gensler-like person.
And tell
And
us a little bit what happened on the Gessler and I guess Elizabeth Warren's
yeah,
nudging.
yes. They took a very broad view of what would be a security.
Yeah.
And what that effectively means is if you're the SEC, you can look at pretty much any crypto token and say, nope, it's a security. What you're doing and what you've done is illegal, and you can't do anything else unless we say it's okay. And we don't really know what we want yet, but we'll figure it out. So that just squelches everything.
Yep.
And that's the short layman version of what's happened. It's just it's squashed innovation, and it's held the industry back quite a bit.
And then they went after the banks, right? They went after the banks that hold custody on crypto. Anybody who dealt anything with crypto, they
Yeah, yeah. That was a what was a reputational risk. That was one of the excuses for there, because supposedly under crypto, the only people who use crypto are criminals,
yeah.
terrorists.
I mean, they forced that bank in California to shut down Silvergate.
So Silvergate, Silicon Valley Bank, so Silvergate, and one other one that I'm
There was
forgetting.
the New York bank. There was a New
Yeah,
York bank that probably, if it didn't have crypto, would not have been closed. But
yeah,
because they had crypto, was probably shut down because of
it-
that.
that's right. And that was the Barney Frank Bank,
Yes. Yeah.
ironically.
Yeah. He was on the board. So,
And here you have the former Democrat chairman of the House Financial Services Committee saying, "No, this is bogus." But it didn't matter.
yeah, that was surprising. It didn't matter because
Yeah, yeah,
he'd have some political capital over there. But I guess he's at the end of his career, not the peak or the beginning.
I guess
Yeah.
not enough
Yeah.
sway anymore, I
Yeah.
guess.
All right, let's see. We got a few questions here from the audience.
Okay.
Michael asks, I mean, feel free to say, if you don't want to answer them, that's fine. And Michael asks, is the stock market doing well because of deregulation under Trump?
Hmm. I mean, I
Is there deregulation going on? Or put it this way, is there deregulation going on under Trump?
I think that there are pockets of things that are better for regulation, for the regulatory environment, for
Hmm.
there's no doubt. Um, I think a lot of that is agency driven though,
Yeah.
so hopefully, I mean, not hopefully, I mean, it will last as long as an agency lets it last.
Hmm.
Um, I but I don't see the massive type of deregulatory state that, we need.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they can do that without bills.
They need Congress.
Yeah,
They need
yeah,
Congress, but they
yeah,
need to do the hard work that's involved in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, maybe in energy, it seems like they're taking a more systematic approach to deregulation.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the bright spots.
Yeah.
From my understanding of it is that it is one of the bright spots.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but financial markets,
Nothing.
I
Yeah.
would say that we're much better off than Gensler than we were with Gensler for crypto and
Yep.
stuff like that. And on the banking side, I'm sure that the larger banks are happy that they're going to get a better capital regime than they would have had otherwise.
And they're
Um,
going to allow consolidation, I think, in the smaller bank space. The Biden administration really restricted the consolidation, and banking need to consolidate. We have still way too many
yeah,
banks.
yeah. Oh, I would agree with that. I think we're probably in the minority opinion there, but yeah,
Yep.
everybody loves the community banks for some reason. Uh,
Yeah, crazy. I mean, I love. I don't know if you know Kalamaris's work on the difference between the Canadian banking system and the American banking system, and it's
yeah.
striking.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah. Charlie's done a lot of great work on that. So is George Selgin.
yeah, of course. Yeah,
It's an enormous difference.
yeah.
The U.S. has the worst track record of pretty much any industrialized country, and you can't really say that they've been deregulated
No,
ever, pretty
no,
much ever. Um, so
no. It's layer upon layer, right? They keep
oh yeah,
layering them on.
yeah, 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 yeah. And that's another area where, there are some marginal changes for sure. Um, but there's not a structural change in the way we do the regulatory stuff, right? It's there's some good things like the reputational risk stuff coming
Yep,
out of Congress, but there's we need a lot more. Um, I would say.
yep. Oh yeah.
But I
So
hate to I hate to predict or prognosticate on why the stock market is doing good or bad.
yeah, nobody should. Nobody should.
No, no, no,
It's
no.
a
No.
very dangerous game.
Yes.
Um, so here's another one, prediction procrastinating. So what is going to happen with AI? I mean, if everybody's still panicking about something, tech reducing manufacturing jobs 20 years ago, AI is going to revolutionize productivity in a way you know, jobs are going to change dramatically. How does the world deal with AI? I mean, economically, I don't think it's a problem, but
Yeah.
politically, and in terms of the kind of stuff, the policy stuff, what happens?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's probably a little bit broader, than my area of expertise. Economically, I agree. I think it will work out. Um, Politically, you know, there are all these data problems that we have politically, in the sense that everybody freaks out about who has what data and what you can do with it or what the
Mhm.
companies can do with it. And then we get into this weird space of should the government do this or that, or should the government have that, or should the company have that? And there's a lot of potential major policy snafus, I think, that you can get out of that. See a lot of stuff happening at the state level.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I think, it's probably the beginning of this is going to be a little messy. But I don't know politically. I don't know where that goes either.
Yeah.
I'd be hard pressed to make a easy prediction on that one.
Yeah. I mean, I see these factories in China. They call them lights out factories because they
Oh,
never have to turn on the lights
wow.
because there are no human beings there. It's just these robots just doing it all.
It's all automated.
Yeah, and it's 100% automated, and that's the future, one way or the other. You know,
Yeah, I mean it more
what about
automated
AI? Yeah,
for sure. How long it takes to get there and how pervasive it ends
yeah,
up being,
yeah,
we'll see.
yeah. So Jacob asks, what's a competitive edge for brick and mortar banks? I can't see their purpose other than consumer sentiment for an in-person banker.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people do like going in to see somebody. The banks many banks, not the banks, many banks still base their business on relationship building.
Yeah.
Um, I think you would I would have to say without data, but I think my gut feeling is that their competitive advantage has gone down, you
I,
know.
I think
But
the best data on that is the fact that the number of branches are shrinking.
yeah, I mean
So so
they
so
recognize it.
yeah, they know it, and so yeah, I'd say the people who like to go into the bank
Hmm.
are dying off. So I
Hmm.
think my generation is probably the last generation.
Yeah,
I mean, because the
yeah,
kids. Uh,
that's right.
I mean, I don't go into bank. I haven't been to the
No,
bank in a long time.
I don't either. Neither my wife doesn't. My son, I don't think has ever been inside of a
Ever.
bank.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. So it's all going to be on the phone. And this is why you don't need so many community banks. Community banks are dying, will die ultimately.
yep,
Hopefully they'll consolidate away instead of just going bankrupt, but they will die.
yeah.
Uh,
That's another interesting piece of this administration because a lot of the small banks are called CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions.
Okay.
So a lot of those smaller banks are subsidized quite a bit. They get a lot of grants, they implement tax credits, but
We
the truth
keep them
is
alive.
you don't need them,
Yeah.
you don't. You could lend to a rural community from anywhere.
Yep.
Um, maybe you do need a branch here or there. I mean, I like that's for them to decide, but you don't need thousands of little banks that are tied to individual communities, which is what the Community Reinvestment Act,
Hmm.
a big regulatory piece. That whole thing is misplaced. The
Yep.
technology has outstripped that act. It's a 1977 bill that says you have to reinvest in the community that you're in.
Yeah.
That was before we had branch banking legalized.
Hmm.
And now with technology, it's basically completely obsolete.
Yep. But it served its purpose of redistributing wealth to the
Yeah.
those social groups who all the groups that got the investment money in their communities.
Yep.
I remember they used to bribe the banks and say, "We'll object to your merger unless you pay us X,"
That's
and
right.
you got the money.
No, that's right. That's right.
The money. Uh, Kim asks if you have any thoughts on Millet.
Oh, it's been great to see.
Yeah, one bright spot in the world.
Yeah, it's great for me. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Cato went down and did a big conference with him.
Okay.
I think it's a great example in the modern world of markets really do work. Um, and regulation and heavy government involvement don't. If the metric is, people doing well and
Yeah.
people improving their living standards,
Uh, It's
I
it's
think it's
uh,
been
it's
awesome.
pretty amazing what he's managed to do in a year. I mean, in a year and a bit. So it's
Yes.
quite stunning. Let's see. Oh yeah, Kim also asked, what's the best data to show people to dispute the claim the middle class shrinking because everyone is getting poor?
Well, I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff in the book. I'm not trying to hawk the book.
And just talk the book. The
Yeah.
book.
I mean,
Buy his
email
book.
me and I'll send you the book for free. But you can that's the thing, there's really not one best bit of data. Like you can look at household income data, you can look at personal income data, you can look at consumption data, you can look at uh total compensation data. And there's a whole bunch of references in there. I've got a whole bunch of blog posts, that show different cuts of this. The thing to remember is you want to look at as long of a series as possible. You want to avoid the trick of starting the series somewhere, excuse me, starting to look at somewhere in the middle of the series. Um, it's better to adjust it with the PCE for inflation rather than the CPI.
What's the
But
difference
even
between the two?
the CPI is going to bias you downward, so it's not going to look like there's as much growth.
Mhm.
Because there's already about a bias toward higher inflation in there.
Okay.
Um, but even if you just do use the CPI, And you can use the official um, Census Bureau numbers. When they put out the household income distribution. If you want to avoid, having to listen to somebody like me and just go to the government website, go to the Census Bureau where they put out the annual household income distribution, you can see that. You can go
Yep.
right there. You can see it. And you
Yep.
can see if you look at the long series, you don't see this, you see this. It's real. It's
Yep.
really there. Um, but I do have more in the book. I have more blog posts.
Yeah.
I'm happy to send things.
And you post stuff on Twitter
Yeah.
that corroborates all this. Kim also asks, is the middle class shrinking a problem even if they're getting richer? Should we redefine middle class?
Well, in one sense, it's it's the group that's in the middle. And if people are getting richer and they're still in the middle, well, I don't really care.
Yep.
That's how I look at that. Um, the part of the problem is, how do you define middle? And if you do define it in a static way, what happens when people get richer? And I don't think that that's a problem. I think that
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So even the people who come into the middle, or used to be the middle, have been getting richer. And I think that as long as per capita income is going up, as long as people at the lower end and every other cut that we take of that distribution, as long as those people have opportunities, and as long as those people are doing well, then we're good.
Well, we're good. We're not as good as we could be.
No, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So,
I
no,
yes, I should have been more careful.
no,
Yeah.
that's fine.
No, I mean, I do. Because and that's a fine line that I walk with the book,
Yeah.
because I do think that things could be a lot better. I
Yeah.
do. Um, and given how good that they had been, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that that's amazing. And unfortunately, I think we're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I do think you're going to see things flatten out a bit, um, which is
I think so.
tragic.
Yeah. Stagnation it looks like it's where we're heading.
They have what some would call a degrowth agenda, whether they want to say that or not.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
that's
the
what,
left and right are united on this. That's what's scary.
yes, it's
It's
very hard to see getting out of it.
right. If so Mick asks, if the foreign companies eat the tariffs, could that justify saying China will pay me so much money, just justifying them? And
No, no, I mean, that's, no.
they can't eat the tariffs.
No, they can't. And even if you want to have that thought experiment, okay, fine. Then basically what you're doing is you're saying that a tax on our imports is a tax on their exports. So now you're going to take money away from them. On their side, they're going to have less money to buy other stuff.
Mhm.
So that's still a decline in your overall consumer base, and that's enriching government officials, not the private sector, and not the people who are trying to make a living. So no, it's still not a win.
And given that it appears tariff revenue is way up, somebody we're obviously paying for it.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
the American government doesn't get anything directly from China. They get
That's
it
right.
from customs officials who collect customs at
At the
American
border.
borders. So we are
Right.
paying for it one way or the other.
That's right. No.
Yeah.
No, no. And I mean, there's not, like, historically the average rate of profit is not 50 and 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the way any businesses tend to work. For
Particularly
long
not in
business
China
units.
and particularly now
No,
Walmart, right? None
no,
of these
no.
companies, they run a very thin margins, so they could go out of business if they eat it,
Yeah,
which is another hit on our standard of living, quality of life. So
that's
there's
right.
no way out of it.
No, no.
Jacob says Hong Kong didn't collect financial data for years due to their fear that politicians would distort it. Should all governments do the same?
I mean, it's
Take
there's
us out
a
of business, but yeah, some people out of business, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can make a good case for that.
Yeah.
Um, I think unfortunately, if we talk about the realm of what's possible in the US politics right now, I don't think we're close.
No.
But
No.
yeah, I mean, I get
Milei
it.
might do it in Argentina.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
imagine him doing something like that.
See what happens there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think this is the last question. Esoteric dichotomy says the middle class is shrinking with more moving up, some falling down. How do we address those who fall behind and grow resentful and destructive?
And go resentful.
Yeah, because they're falling down, they grow resentful and destructive.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Well, I mean, so I'm sure some have fallen down, but again, that's to be clear, that's a small
Because
fraction.
the actual low income has actually shrunk, the number
Yeah,
of people in the low income.
yes, and the groups at the lower end, on average, have done much better as well. Now, so all that said, okay, this is another one of those things where um, let's let's just sort of theorize that the thing to do is to have some government safety net. I'm not saying you should, but let's
Yep.
just say you should have some government safety net there that maybe it even includes, say, like career development and a special assistance and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Okay, well, we've actually got that. And we've had that for many years. We've had specific things that deal with trade assistance. So if your job was taken away by a trade,
Yep.
then
Yep.
you go for that. And we've had over 3,000 one-stop labor development shops. We've got aid for 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, vocational training. All of that is we have financial aid available to everybody, especially lower income folks. It's easier for them to get it. Now, I so I'm willing to entertain that it's possible that we need to do those sorts of things, but I just want to start from the position of okay, we
Yeah,
do
we
those
already do
things.
it.
We
Yeah.
have been, and we have been for decades. That's not new. This stuff started a lot of it in the 30s or 40s, increasing so in the 60s and 70s, and it has not gone away. Um, so there are things that we can do as just members of our community and our society, just to be aware of what's going on and pay attention to our fellow citizens as well. I think that's important to live
And
that
a lot
way.
of it's education, right? As long as we have these people
Yeah.
on the right and the left capitalizing on these people's frustrations,
Yes.
it's very hard to get through. But if you had actual leadership explaining to them what's actually going on,
Yes. I think that would
maybe
help.
maybe the all these things would be different. But yeah. All
And
right, great. This has been fun. Thanks, Norbert. Really
thank you,
appreciate it.
Yaron. Yeah, I
So,
appreciate you having
where
me
can
on.
people find your stuff? Twitter
Uh,
handle, stuff like that.
yeah, if you go to cato.org, you can search my name, or if you just do a Google search, Cato Norbert
Yep.
Michel,
Yep.
Michel, I'm right. You'll find me right there.
Yep. Yep.
On
And don't
Twitter.
forget, guys, to get the book. So, Crushing Capitalism.
Thank you.
Populist policies are threatening the American dream. It's Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available everywhere. So get the book.
And it's a quick read.
Yep. It's a quick read and it's fun. If you like data, absolutely get it. And if you want those tools, I think Kim asked for convincing people, the data's all there.
Yeah. I hope it's there. I tried my best to keep it pretty comprehensive and not put people to sleep. So
Great. Thanks, Norbert.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Keep up the good work. All right.
Take care,
Bye.
man.